हाँ मैम सही है। हाँ आप वहीं से बोलिए। ठीक है। कुछ रखना नहीं नहीं छोड़ दो। एक मिनट रुकिए। ठीक है।
Yeah. Oh. Hi, can you hear? Am I audible?
I can hear you.
Oh, good.
Not very loudly, but I can hear you.
I'm so sorry for the delay. And oh, wait. So I won't have to turn around every time.
Hello.
And should we start? So am I audible? Shall we start? A very good afternoon to all present here. Am I audible? Is this all right for you? Okay. So a very good afternoon to all and a warm welcome to the second and last day of the Literature Festival being organized by Shabdpakhi College, Covenant, University of Delhi. The brainchild of a dynamic principal, Professor Sadhna Sharma, our book club, Books Ago, have organized book discussions from time to time. The words have now taken wings as Shabdpakhi, culminating in the present two-day literature festival, encompassing themes of literature, cinema, theatre, society, marginalized narratives, media, and our very own session today, the Author's Corner, with the theme feminism in fiction and non-fiction. It's my privilege to welcome our esteemed panelists for this session, Ms. B. Raghav, who is joining us online, and Dr. Sadhna Sharma, who will unfortunately not be able to join us today, but has shared her views in a recorded clip, which we shall play to the audience in a while. It is always a challenge to introduce multifaceted personalities like our panelists today, but I shall do my best to do justice to them. B. Raghav is a writer and journalist. She is well known for her work In Search of Mary, inspired by Mary Wollstonecraft, which won the Society of Authors in London Trust Award. Her bestseller, talking about Jane Austen in Baghdad, was dramatized by the BBC and translated to many languages. She has chaired the Mary on the Green campaign to memorialize Mary Wollstonecraft and is a founding trustee of the human rights education charity, the Wollstonecraft Society. She has had a long association with the BBC, which also brought her to India, and I dare say the beginning of a long association with the country. She writes for BBC Online, The Telegraph, Radya, Times, Guardian, and Daily Mail. She has also participated in literary festivals across the globe, including the Jaipur Literature Festival, British Council literary events in Iraq, Norway, Palestine, and Russia. A very warm welcome to you, Lee.
Thank you.
Our second guest is also a writer and columnist and a blogger. Dr. Sadhna is author, civil servant, and holds a doctorate in economics. Her publications include Anilan Masalam, A Syrian Journey, When the Parallels Meet, Catching Fireflies, Never a Disconnect, and the science fiction Ascendance, which has recently been translated into Hindi as Our Roman. She has also participated in a number of literary festivals and is also a host, anchor, and actor with Doordarshan. It's really a pity that she's not available here today. She hasn't been able to come. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have had a wonderful session with two luminaries like you. But anyway, so Literature, they say, mirrors society, and the reflection of women has ranged from passive to oppressive, neglected or dominated, but never equal. Feminism, simply stated, seeks to provide women equality and justice in every sphere. In academia, it becomes a more serious attempt to understand and analyze many constructions of feminism in diverse political, social, economic, cultural, environmental, and literary movements. And to further explore these questions in fiction and non-fiction, I turn to our first speaker of the session, Bee Rowlett. So to begin our discussion, Bee, please tell us about your book, In Search of Mary. What made you want to take the journey, follow in the footsteps of Mary Wollstonecraft? And before you tell us about the book, you talk about it, please do tell our audience, our students, a little bit about Mary Wollstonecraft and why she's hailed as the pioneer feminist.
Okay.
Floor to you, and welcome once again.
Well, it's lovely to see you all, and a big hello to all the students who are there. It's very exciting to me that you're happy to dedicate your weekends to the pursuit of literature, which is, of course, a most important endeavour. As the mighty Ursula Le Guin has said, we read books to discover who we are. So I'm sure you're all very sympathetic. What I'm getting right now is a view of the ceiling, but I'm just going to keep talking in the hope that there are actually some people in that room, and I hope you can hear me. Oh, you've disappeared. Can you hear me?
Sure.
A wave? You can? Yeah. Oh, hello. Oh, that's nice. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to meet you. Oh, lovely. It's just really nice to be able to see people's faces, and a little bit reassuring too. So I will briefly introduce you to Mary Wollstonecraft, who is, curiously, very little known when you consider her contribution to the pantheon of literature, politics, human rights. She was born in 1759 in the East End of London into a very unpromising family, a family that did not believe in educating girls. Women were, of course, scarcely better in these times than property. You were basically the property of your husband, like an armchair or a kettle. And Wollstonecraft grew up in that climate. So from a very early age, she felt the injustice of this and became, as a very young woman, an educator herself. She basically was self-taught in the 1780s by connecting herself to families who had books. And then through her sort of enterprising and courageous spirit, managed to widen her horizons, travelled to London and set up a school for girls. And that is where the fascination begins, with her lifelong dedication to education and also to the feminist cause. The first book she writes is actually Thoughts on the Education of Daughters. And it's not as philosophically significant as her later work, but it certainly gives you a clue to the future direction. Her great, most famous work is, of course, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, written in 1792, and was very influential. It was quoted in liberation movements from Jamaica to India. It was a riposte to political moves in the French Revolution. So it was part of a global conversation. And it's contained two very radical ideas. One, women are human beings. I know, radical, right? And the other is that as such, as human beings, they deserve to be educated. And these are the two central planks of Wollstonecraft's philosophy. And on first glance, that doesn't seem that much. I mean, to us as modern people, as modern educated women, you think, well, obviously, but of course it's not obvious. It wasn't obvious then, and it isn't obvious today in Afghanistan and other places in the world where, you know, young women and girls really have to fight to get educated. So you can never take these things for granted. Briefly onwards to my interaction with her, I actually encountered Wollstonecraft not as a politics student, but as a literature student. So I studied English literature as an undergrad, and I was reading the Romantics. the good old, you know, Coleridge, Wordsworth, those guys. And I read a small footnote that they had been inspired by a political woman on a voyage. It was a very small footnote that glancingly referred to her. And this was, of course, Mary Wollstonecraft. So I looked up this footnote, and it transpired that Mary Wollstonecraft travelled in the year 1795 with a small baby, her baby, born out of wedlock. She travelled on what effectively was a treasure hunt, seeking her boyfriend's missing shipment of smuggled silver. I know this sounds like a completely ridiculous kind of movie plot. It doesn't sound like a real thing that people or women did in 1795. So that fact, that little footnote, sunk into my imagination. I then, of course, discovered that she is considered in the Western canon as the foremother of feminism. She was the first person in the English language to demand, she didn't ask for, she demanded gender equality, which makes her extraordinary to my mind. She ended up from the inauspicious and problematic and challenged beginnings that I've outlined to you. She ended up being perhaps one of the greatest thinkers of the 18th century. Professor Amartya Sen has described her as one of the most underestimated thinkers of the Enlightenment, for her vision of human rights. She was reaching towards the idea of human rights before such a thing existed. There wasn't the language of human rights, and yet she was able to envisage such a thing. So I hope I'm giving you an idea of a truly extraordinary, courageous, brilliant woman, very bold in her time. She was beleaguered by tragedy as well. Also, I may come to that later. But someone who is very, very important in the Western canon, and is important in the political landscape of all the subsequent literature that I have studied and continue to read. And so the juncture came in my sort of mid-career. I had done some writing, but I returned to the inspiration of this journey in 1795 that Mary Wollstonecraft undertook. And it struck me as so unusual. She goes off with this little baby of hers, I think it was 13 months old, and travels in a series of kind of wobbly carriages, boats, around the very rocky shores of Norway and the Skagerrak Sea, the Scandinavian Sea. And this is a time when, to be honest, most men would think twice about traveling on their own because of the very real risk of highwaymen and of pirates. But not Wollstonecraft. She is utterly fearless, and she writes an extraordinary book called Letters from Norway. And I'd like perhaps to engage some of your thoughts on genre and the uses of genre, because Wollstonecraft was a real genre bender. She was brilliant at twisting and playing with genre. And to suit her political ambitions, she used non-fiction, fiction, and then the Letters from Norway, the book that I just mentioned, is a curious blend of travelogue, personal letters, autobiography, very cunningly disguised, and sort of dry political observation interspersed with bouts of sarcasm and humour. It's an extraordinary piece of writing. And it's what she wrote as she travelled around on this mysterious treasure hunt. And so I decided, perhaps foolishly, to attempt to recreate that journey. So I travelled in Mary Wollstonecraft's footsteps, and I took my youngest child, who somewhat conveniently was the same age as the baby that Mary Wollstonecraft. So I'll show you the cover, because it's quite sweet. Look. So you can see the sort of Scandinavian houses and a woman with a baby. So that's me and my baby retracing Mary Wollstonecraft's adventures. Of course, it wasn't just a way of illuminating her life and her legacy, but also, I think, a much needed glance inside the tensions around maternity, motherhood, mothers' rights, women's rights, and where that sits in modern feminism. So I had quite a lot to explore there. And I tried to do it in a way that was sort of engaging, in a way that is easy to read, because it struck me during the writing, and as I explored Wollstonecraft's legacy further, that it was a great injustice that she was so little known. We've heard of the great writers of the Enlightenment. We know who they are, and of the great novelists. But Wollstonecraft's name was pretty much annihilated. She wasn't forgotten. She was actively annihilated because of the way that she lived her personal life. She chose to have a child out of wedlock. She had very passionate affairs with people, possibly as a queer icon. That, you know, it's modern day speculation, but she certainly formed very deep and significant attachments to early friendships with other women. And so all of this was deemed completely unacceptable in this is just pre-Victorian Britain, so things were taking a turn for the more conservative rather than the more liberal. And when she died in childbirth, aged only 38, she was only 38 when she died. And she died giving birth to who? Does anybody know? You won't believe this, to Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. So Mary Wollstonecraft is Frankenstein's grandmother. I know, I told you she was amazing. So yes, she died young, tragically, and a further tragedy ensued, which was that the political landscape chose then to wipe out her memory. She was associated with disgrace, with fallen women. This is what happens when you are too ambitious, when you ask for too much. And she was held up like, you know, the women on the wall in Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. She was made an example of. So as her legacy was rendered toxic overnight, therefore, she was never the great figure of the canon that she really deserves to be. So that was another of the motives, if you like, to my reading to my writing of her work, was to basically just make more people know about her. I'm going to pause now because I've been talking for quite a long time, and I don't know if there's any questions, or if Rita, you have any further comments you'd like to add on there. I can't actually hear you.
Questions at the end. We can take the questions at the end. Maybe
Okay.
Take another 10, 15 minutes.
Well, I mean, this was billed as a conversation, so you know, this isn't a lecture. I'm quite ready to engage in conversation.
There's one question. Hello, Mom.
Hi.
My name is Garima, and I wanted to ask you, I wanted to know your thoughts on crafting of characters, especially the feminist characters that we see in fiction. They're usually crafted in a way that is more masculine instead of showing it in a feminine light. And I think that is a miscalculation on our part of crafting a character in such a way. We see characters like, for example, when we see Katniss from Hunger Games, she is crafted as we are trying to craft her as a feminist icon. However, we are showing that she has all the masculine characters. So, what are your thoughts on that? How should we craft a character that is both feminine, masculine, and a feminist?
That's such an interesting question. I take it you're a writer, a current writer or a future writer. Could I just ask you to clarify the character that you mentioned? Could you repeat their name, please?
I was talking about the protagonist of the Hunger Games.
Oh, Katniss Everdeen. Oh, what a brilliant example. Well, I see you've landed squarely in the realm of fantasy / science fiction, which is, I'm really glad you did. It's not my area of expertise, but I'm fascinated in the use of that genre as a feminist engine, as a feminist vehicle, if you like. right since, and that's why at the very beginning of my conversation with you, I invoked the figure of Ursula Le Guin, whose work I really hope you know. Ursula Le Guin, very helpfully for students, also wrote short stories, because I know that novels can really pile up and be a lot of work. I do recommend that you read some of Ursula Le Guin's work. In particular, what was your name, my friend who asked the question?
Garima.
Darima?
Yes, Garima.
Garima, okay, lovely to meet you. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, Garima, you might be interested to know that Ursula Le Guin wrote a work in which the genders are completely confused. She uses the pronoun he, but it's intended to be completely fluid. And she did this as a philosophical conundrum to imagine a world in which there are no attributed characteristics. I want to put the question back onto you. When you say that Katniss Everdeen evidences feminine and masculine characteristics, I wish to know what you mean by that, because in that filtering, we are ourselves putting structures, putting boxes that fit around certain behaviors and expectations. Do you want to elaborate that further?
Sure. My point was that Katniss Everdeen is the sole breadwinner in her family, and that is the role that is mostly suited to what shown by men. And she also has habits of hunting and hanging out with guy friends, right? All the attributes and qualities that we put on males is all the qualities that Katniss has. While I would love to see in fiction sometimes a feminist who is not doing all those things, but a feminist enough for the society.
Do you feel like she almost has something to prove? Maybe.
Maybe.
I wonder, I mean, the reason I ask is I have a teenage daughter who, when we're watching Netflix and there's a new series and it features a plucky young feminist who, you know, demands of her Victorian father that she be allowed to read books and demands her education. This to me is really positive messaging. My teenage daughter, who is, you know, far more enlightened than me, rolls her eyes and said, oh God, you know, another, this is such obvious signaling. So I suppose in an ideal and a perfect world, in a world that had gender equality, it would be very refreshing to witness our literary heroines as a realm, as a spectrum of any characteristic, of any kind of behaviors, not having to go out and earn the dinner and shoot a bow and arrow to show, hey, guess what, I'm smashing the patriarchy, but just to be able to inhabit any role at all, any role imaginable. But we are not in a gender equal world. We're just not anywhere, not even Scandinavia, which I always hold up as this, you know, fabled equal society. Nowhere's equal. And so perhaps, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but I want to raise the question, does fiction have a role in inviting, perhaps demanding, that we imagine traditional stereotypical gender roles more creatively? And if you think about, I mean, I'm looking at a room of clearly educated and bright people, but perhaps some people who view women as inferior, as incapable, as weak, perhaps it would be great for them to see Katniss Everdeen with her bow and arrow defending her family. Perhaps they need it more than we do. And so I had an interesting conversation just recently, actually, about, and this is a slight shift, but I think it addresses the same subject area around gender equality. Excuse me. Recently, here in Britain, a prize for music. It's called the Brit Awards, and it's a really renowned prize for singers, songwriters, musical artists. And they recently scrapped the gender differences. So there was a prize for best female singer and a prize for best male singer. And they scrapped this to make it gender neutral. And at first I was like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, it should be gender neutral. Everybody should just be there on merit, right? In an ideal world. Of course, what happened was that then the shortlist comprised of only men. So it meant that women were denied a space to be celebrated in. So what looked on the face of it like a really positive, gender neutral and progressive step ended up having a very different result. And I think what happened there is that what was a good idea in someone's head had different real world applications. So I think similarly with literature, we should consider the real world applications and the real world effects, rippling effects of the characters that we create. So this is a long-winded way of winding back to your question about how we create characters. I certainly feel a responsibility as a writer in how I present myself, and how I present women in an unequal, and how I present different levels of power structure within an existing power structure. So it's obviously not just about gender, it's about much more than that. And it's something that I am conscious of and try to be very scrupulous about. Some might argue that that's an inhibiting factor, that fiction should just be exactly that. It's just fiction. It just lives where it lives. It's the creation of a different world. You can enter into it freely and inhabit it as a realm of the imagination. I would disagree. I am almost fixated on the real world implications. I see fiction almost and non-fiction so closely aligned because I believe in the power of literature. I believe in the power of words and the power of books and the power of people that write them and the power of people that read them as well. Reading is also not a passive experience, it's an active experience. And you're entering someone else's mind and you're entering someone else's world. And that's a very active thing to do. It's a very powerful thing to do. So I'm kind of, I appreciate I've run away a little bit with your question. But I would end by saying that if you're not seeing the character that you want to see in literature, then that, my friend, is your next book, which I await. I hope to read it one day. Please do, please do. I look forward to that. Who amongst you has read, whilst we discuss envisaging worlds and whilst we tapped repeatedly onto the area of science fiction, of fantasy, which I did also hope to explore because the other interlocutor, Sadhna's book, Ascendance, was going to address this theme of feminist utopias, of feminist dystopias. Have you read Begum Rokeya Sultana's Dream? No, she's a giant of a Bengali writer, and she wrote, it's a short story again, so it's super easy, you have no excuse. She wrote a short story called Sultana's Dream. It was published in the Indian Ladies magazine in 1905. And she, much like Mary Wollstonecraft, was a brilliant writer and an educator. And it's an extraordinary piece of work. It's a short story that imagines the gender roles completely reversed. So the men are in purdah and the women are powerful, they move around and socialize, and she also envisages sort of flying cars, and it all is predicated on an environmental utopia as well as a feminist utopia. And I just want to pop that down. Please make a note of that. It's a really important read, I believe, in the evolution of feminist literature.
Actually, she preempted me. I had a question, similar question about feminist writing. Feminist writings in these two genres, fiction and non-fiction, and especially about women's agency. So I think some of it was, some of it was addressed by you while you were talking to her. And this one more thing, the two questions actually. you have been visiting or you participated in a lot of literary festivals. What is your perception about present day women writers? And secondly, what advice would you give to our young girls here who want to become writers?
Thank you. I'm going to go straight to the second question, if you don't mind, because I love this question. I hope that many of you are already writing. I trust that you are not just consuming, but that you're creating. Start by writing a journaling. Start by, keeping notes, writing notes. You can just do it on your phone. But it's a really, really important habit. People talk about, daily goals of 1,000 words. I'm quite a fan of that kind of discipline. I'm quite a fan of being able to bank a certain amount of words a day. If you're engaging in that, do you all study lit? Can you put your hand up if you're literature students? History students? Okay, is it? So one history student and the rest maths? Like what are you, why are you here? If you don't mind me asking. Are you studying literature? Or are you just being very shy? You're being shy. Okay, I'm going to assume that you're studying literature and that's why you're here. Shyness isn't really helpful in being a writer, I have to tell you. I used to be quite shy and awkward, and I've trained myself to be confident. I've trained myself to have a confidence that I did not used to possess. And this is partly in conjunction with the work that Ritu just mentioned, interviewing writers, giving platform to writers, chairing writer dialogues and conversations at the festivals that I work at. I also program events in the British Library here in London. So I live in a world of books and in a world of writers. And to address your first question, how I see women's writing, I'm really biased because I see almost nothing else than women's writing. I love it so much. I think because, and this is no offense to men or men writers at all, feminism is for everybody. I want to be absolutely clear that this is not about ever being rude or anti-men, but I was reared on a diet of male writers. So I studied English literature at school and at university. And I know my Hardy, my Dickens, my Shakespeare, my William Blake, my Wordsworth. I know all these guys, they're all men. I'm from Yorkshire, so luckily I knew Emily Bronte because we all read Wuthering Heights. But I read, the percentage, the ratio of women to men writers in my early nourishing phases was problematic. I think this has changed a lot. This has changed, and I'm really glad that it's changed. And I think it hasn't just changed to more of a gender balance, but it's also changed as to the background and the cultural hinterland of people that young students now read. So the profile has changed a lot. However, I predate that. So I grew up in a white male landscape. And once I kind of gained consciousness of this, I've been making up for it ever since. So I read as widely and as diversely as I possibly can. And I actually am very much more interested in the world as seen from, not from the sidelines, but the world seen from a different view than the view we've all been given. So it's almost a bit like the history that we're taught. I look at history and think, well, who decided? I mean, Britain's the worst at this. We have main character energy in a big way. So we've placed ourselves at the center of, everything by force. And this persists in the historical narratives that we use to understand our place in the world. Of course, every country does this to a greater or lesser extent, but I'm really interested in the removal of those goggles of what I've been fed and what I've consumed to this point, and in attempting always to refresh my view of the world. So sometimes I force myself to read things that I don't particularly enjoy. Or sometimes I'll start reading something that I think, oh, this is hard. So I'm reading something that's in a patois a Jamaican woman who writes in patois, who's writing in sort of 1980s London. And in my first few pages, I was like, oh, this is really challenging. I don't understand her experiences and the language is hard. But then I thought, well, of course it is, because I've been educated to see literature as a particular voice, and I'm trying to challenge that. And, you know, several more pages in, I became comfortable with the use of language, with some of the idioms, and became comfortable also with being a little bit uncomfortable with sort of not being in a familiar surrounding. And I think that is one of the very, very important functions of literature. And if you, as students, wish to advance as readers and writers, as two sides of the same coin, then you should explore those slightly less comfortable areas. By all means, read the stuff you love. Read the stuff you love, because that's important, and that will inspire you as a writer. But sometimes when things are a little bit more challenging, particularly if they're, you know, not your lived experience, I think there's something really worthwhile there. It's certainly, I'm dedicating more time to that kind of reading at the moment. I hope that's a helpful answer for you. Put your hand up if you have written something that you've shared with someone else. Nobody has. Why not? Oh, I have a question. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
I too want to ask a question from you. There are some unacknowledged biases in literary works. We see, when we read literary works in feminist corners, we see some unacknowledged biases. Mostly the female is searching for a loved one or a love life and something like that. Mostly, I have read Sydney Children crime, criminal books, but this adventurous books. But for sure, Sydney Children tries to portray her female character in a very bold and ferocious way, and I love it. But the point is, somewhere or the other, that feminist point of view fades away in any literary work when it comes to feminist scholars. So how can we deal with that if we are trying to write or we are, presenting feminism as a topic?
Do you feel that the books that you have read where you wanted a greater feminist presence have failed you?
Yes, ma'am, but eventually it fades away.
So by that, is that when they get married at the end, the Shakespearean trope repeated forever, that Bollywood, that it ends in a marriage?
Yeah, basically. In almost every other story.
I'm going to present you with Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, where they both die halfway through. And then the next generation are all corrupted and twisted and violent, and it's utterly horrific and confusing. That is not a conformist novel. That doesn't obey any of the rules. I'm not even sure that it is a feminist novel, although it was written by an extraordinary woman who had to disguise herself as a man, so maybe it is. But I would present you with that. I mean, I'm also interested, can you think of any books that subvert or challenge the conditions that you've just described of plucky heroine, but she's seeking love? Can you think of works of literature that subvert that? Or are you saying they're yet to be written?
I guess, basically, when I studied Sydney, the sky is falling. In the starting, that female protagonist was very strong, ferocious, bold, but I think it just faded away. And it was like someone settling and all that.
Well, I will have to repeat what I said to your colleague. This is a space for you to write into. There's the world of literature. It's easy to think, it's finished and all the stories have been told, but they haven't. And even if you worry that they haven't been told by you. They haven't been told by someone that has lived and felt what you have lived and felt. So there's an infinite possibility of reinterpretations. There is something, well, I'm going to try, just as devil's advocate, to defend the traditional formula of girl meets boy and a happy ending. There's something about that sort of recognizable packaging, but certainly in much of the culture that I'm consuming here in London, for example, in the world of theatre, a lot of Shakespeare is being performed. And as we know, Shakespeare was a big fan of the girl meets boy, fall in love, mistaken identities, ha, 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 everyone gets married. Now they're being sort of gender flipped, and it's the girl boy things all being switched around and it's being played with. So you can actually use those structures to a subversive end and play with them and twist them. And again, I'm saying it again, that could be the next thing that you're writing, because clearly you're engaging with these structures and you're engaging critically, saying, you know, this doesn't work for me, this isn't good enough, which suggests to me a very intelligent, advanced, sophisticated level of reading. You know, I think it's very impressive that you engage on that level with the works. I, for a very long time, just read things and kind of liked them. It took a long time for me to get annoyed by them. What is it? Gloria Steinman says, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. So it's part of reaching truth is actually getting annoyed by things. That's certainly true of me more and more as I get older, curiously. But I think as you read and as you engage with literature, you should absolutely be bringing your own questions, the questions from your life as a reader, and challenging and interrogating. And it's sometimes harder when you are reading things, because, you know, I've had interesting modern, you know, mentioning the Hunger Games, for example. I've noticed that I have been mostly referencing older works, so Victorian novels and the Brontes. But it's worth even with older works still bringing your fresh perspectives. I don't really believe that oh things are of their time, you just have to sort of accept it. No, I don't think you do have to accept it. I think all of these works should stand the test of time. I wish I was there. It would be so nice to meet you all.
We'd love to host you.
It would be so lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, the next time you're in Delhi, please do tell us, and we'd love.
Yes, that would be great.
You know, I think what needs to be kept in mind is that what actually defines feminism. I think girls have to understand that. Our students have to understand that as well. Because not all writing, well, you know, whether it is about women or it's about portraying about women or heroines or, you know, the women characters or written by women are feminist literature. So they have to understand what actually feminism is all about, you know, in writing, in literature and in fiction and non-fiction. So that definition, I mean, that clarity should also be there. I sort of sensed a little bit of confusion amongst, you know, the girls when they questioned you about Sidney Sheldon's novels and heroines. So I really don't know, maybe they can, you know, sort of read about it a little more. But there's one question that, you know, that's sort of a little short of time. I'm sorry about this. But you know, how is, and you talked about Mary Wollstonecraft and your own journey as a mother and taking your little baby along. So, how do you think that feminism accommodates motherhood?
Sorry, can you ask the question again? The microphone's.
Feminism accommodates motherhood.
I wish it did. I wish it did. It doesn't. I was a belated feminist. I came late to the game. I managed to think that feminism wasn't necessary all the way up to having kids, when suddenly my career and my husband's career dramatically bifurcated. And suddenly I was the person that got called from the nursery if my children had a cold, etc., etc. So yeah, a good. I've got 4 kids, so that's a good decade of flowing of my career, income, etc. Of course, income and career are not the only arbiters of fulfillment. I don't regret, I mean, having the kids is a wonderful thing. It's an exciting journey. I don't like the sort of the one being set against the other. It's, I think, a false binary, but we are sort of forced into that binary of either a job or kids. And I think that comes from outside. I think that's imposed by society. And I have to say that is a real problem in India, where women's economic participation is so far behind other comparative economies, which is astonishing, because India is such a young and vigorous, such an optimistic country, so educated, and yet women begin careers, and as soon as they get married, I'm making a generalization, but this has been observed and written about a lot, they leave the workplace, and that to me is a huge loss, not just to the workplace and to the economy, but to women and to our identities. I'm lucky because I absolutely love my job. Not everybody, of course, has jobs that they love, but to be engaged in networks outside of the family, I think, is a really important and healthy thing. So this is one of the great failings of feminism, and this obviously happens to greater or lesser extents around the world. So it depends where you look, but I'm turning the gaze right now onto India. I read a very interesting book recently called Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh Khan by an Indian journalist called, oh my goodness, what's her name? It's a very interesting study of, she's an economist in Delhi who writes, can I quickly find it? Will you excuse me whilst I just, Shariana Bhattacharya, I think she's called, Desperately Seeking Shah. Yes, Shariana Bhattacharya, Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh Khan. I really loved this book, non-fiction. It's a collection of interviews that she makes with women from multiple different social, so very rich women, very poor women, urban women, rural women, but she's taking as a prism young women who love Shah Rukh Khan. I mean, obviously, who doesn't? And she's looking at the impact on their lives and on their sort of journeys through lives and their quest for love. And I know that the quest for love is a cliche, and you know there's a feminist trap there. But she explores, in particular, Indian women's disengagement from the workplace as a result of romantic activity, that the one replaces the other, with really interesting results. Actually, to me, it's something of a mystery. I think India's only just behind Saudi Arabia. It's really low, the women's economic participation. Because if you look in other spheres, for example, literary participation, political participation, women are much better represented in India than in many other countries. You've got lots of women leaders. You have had lots of women leaders. So where is this coming from? I appreciate that I've sort of run off into that particular theme. The question was more about motherhood and feminism. Yeah, it is a conundrum. I don't think that I've solved this to my satisfaction. I envisage a world of equal parenting. I think what that requires is sufficient economic development to enable proper parenting leave and good childcare. Neither of those things exist in Britain right now. We don't have affordable childcare, and we don't have equal weighting on parental leave. So women take a lot more time off work, thereby falling behind at work. Men are not taking the parental leave, some of which they're legally entitled, and they just don't take it. So it's a work in progress, and it actually does annoy me a lot. I think, I embarked on being a mother 21 years ago, and kind of look around and go, haven't they fixed this yet? We've done so much, we've achieved so much. Why is this still a problem? But it is. I think it's great that women, if they choose to have children, are doing it later. I think that's a fantastic thing. Because the longer you develop as a human being, I believe, the stronger you become, and the more able to influence your surroundings, the more able you are to decide what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. One of the things I love about having teenage daughters, I've got 3, and they're all their teenage friends, is that unlike me, when I was 16, they know exactly what feminism looks like, and they know what sexism looks like. They know what racism and all forms of discrimination looks like, and they've got names for it. They know how to call it out. And I find that so inspiring that you have that young women are now educated to have the language to, just as you have done, the women in the audience to whom I'm very grateful, who put up their hands and courageously asked me a question. You are looking at a situation and seeing what's wrong with it, and you have a name for it, and you are describing it. And I find that really powerful. I didn't do that when I was young. I've come to it late. But not just as a writer, as a human being and as a woman. I think that's extraordinary. So a special message of love to my friends in the room who asked me a question. Which is another piece of advice, actually. May I? I'm just continuing on a roll now. When I was at school, and also when I was at university, I sat quietly and didn't put my hand up. Looking at some of you, that was me. And as I was too shy, and I thought I might say something that sounded stupid. I now know that it's so important to raise your voice. I can't tell you how much it matters to train yourself as a woman to be able to raise your hand and express yourself. Men are trained not to question themselves or doubt themselves. They just do it anyway. They just say, they will take all the oxygen out of the room. It's one of the reasons why actually I think it's quite successful to educate women separately. In an ideal world, we'd all be educated together. Indeed, Mary Wollstonecraft was a big advocate for educating boys and girls together. However, it's proven, there's a track record, and the data shows that women and girls who are educated separately do have greater confidence in expressing themselves. And so I think you're really lucky to have that start of being able to put your hand up, ask a question, don't worry about saying the wrong thing. Just allow yourself to express yourself, and don't be afraid.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And any more questions? Okay, so well, no more questions for you. And okay, okay, answer. We have this clip now from the message from the other panelist, Dr. Sadhana Shankar. So, that's about a 15-20 minute presentation. Would you like to sort of stay on, or
because we started late, I do have other commitments in my day, unfortunately, that I now need to attend to. So much as I was very much hoping to talk to Sadhana, I'm very sorry to say that I won't be able to stay on any longer.
That's perfectly understandable. And but then let me thank you. Let me take this opportunity to thank you for joining us. And unfortunately, we just got a little delayed. So thank you so much for joining us and talking to the girls. And your wonderful presentation about a different world of 18th century Europe. Mary Wollstonecraft's journey of freedom and liberty, and women's consciousness and the choices we make, and what she would probably mean to, what she would teach 21st century feminists as well. How much of it actually gets translated across time and geography is a moot point. In India, it's a different struggle and a different mindset, and you mentioned that yourself. You just mentioned that yourself. So, we are sort of struggling with our own and about this. So it's been great having you. And I think personally, I feel that it's time that we see gender as a spectrum instead of two sets of opposing ideas. And something which I found fascinating Sometimes I think technology just tells you to shut up and let it be. So this is the quote which I found really fascinating, where she says that my dreams were all my own, accounted for them to nobody. They were my refuge when annoyed, and my dearest pleasure when free. So I think somewhere that really sums up what women would really, really want that for themselves. I think even today and across time and across centuries. So even though we have progressed a lot, we have achieved a lot, but there are some things which still need to be worked out. And thank you once again. Thank you so much for joining in. And of course, the invitation is open. The next time you're in Delhi, we'd love to have you in person here.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much. It was a joy to meet you all. Bye.
ये हमारे सेकंड स्पीकर भी पार्टनर स्पीकर ये उन्होंने क्लिप रिकॉर्ड कर देता है कि वो आ नहीं पाएगा तो आप भी उनको उनका एड्रेस भी सुनिए।
Namaskar and good afternoon. Sadhna Sharma ji, principal and patron of this NITFest, and all the people gathered here, and my co-panelist, Ms. B. Rowlett. I'm really very sorry that I could not make it for this event today due to some unforeseen official engagement. And so I have decided that I will record my intervention and share it with you. I hope you do enjoy it, and I really missed being at the LitFest today. So the topic for today's panel that we were given was feminism in fiction and non-fiction. And when I read it and reread it and tried to think about it, I realized that each and every word in that topic, feminism, fiction, non-fiction, is something. On each word there can be a separate session, because there is really a lot of debate and no real concise definition of feminism, of what is fiction, what is non-fiction. So then I thought about it and I decided that I will speak about the genre I write and I enjoy the most, which is science fiction. So what is feminism? Simply put, it is a belief in social, economic and political equality of the sexes. Finally, in my view, it is an idea that helps women have agency to exercise choice. Choices about ourselves, our lives and our bodies. And of course, choices about our aspirations. All of us sitting here today, gathered here, whether online or physically, we all know that really what it is that denies women the agency to make choices for themselves. It is a social structure that is based on biology, that is designed by men, for men and about men. And what's literature? Literature is always a reflection and dissection of the times that we are living in, or have lived in the past, or will live in the future. And fiction is the class of literature that comprises works of imaginative narration, especially prose. And what's a feminist novel? A feminist novel would be one where the concerns of women and womanhood are the main threads of the narrative, and it deals primarily with the lives of its women characters. Not all novels that are about women are feminist novels. What comes to my mind are, like in the old times when we were younger, Mills and Boon novels. Nobody can say that they are feminist novels. And in current times, look at 50 Shades of Grey. It's about women, but it really doesn't come, in my view, in the category of a feminist novel. An illuminating definition of the feminist novel has been given by American writer Roxana Gay. I quote, "A feminist novel, then, is one that not only deals explicitly with the stories and thereby the lives of women, it is also a novel that illuminates some aspect of the female condition and, or offers some kind of imperative for change and, or makes a bold or unapologetic political statement in the best interests of women," unquote. Whatever be the form or substance of a novel, it can be horror, romance, fiction, the story is the queen of any novel. And any ideas, even if it is feminism, have to emanate from that queen, from that story in the book. And writing a novel gives expression, it provides an outlet, and can provide a platform for activism and exploration. And for women who write, all these are important milestones in the creative process. But for women writers, all these milestones can only be achieved if actually they can write in their own name. I'm just harking back a little just to give a perspective about what women writers have been going through and still are going through. I'm sure we all know about female writers who have originally in the beginning written under male names or pseudonyms. And I think the most famous in these are the Bronte sisters and even Harper Lee, who's actually a woman who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And she changed her name to this androgynous Harper so that people do not identify that story with a female writer. But it's not about just people in the past. Even J.K. Rowling, you didn't use her name Joanne Rowling for her Harry Potter series because her publisher advised her that it would be better to use initials so that she doesn't lose out on young male readers. Or look at Alice Sheldon. She wrote from 1967 till her death under the name James Triptey Jr. And actually the James Triptey Jr. Award for science fiction or fantasy explorations of gender is actually named after her. So women writers have a long way, they are on a journey of their own empowerment story. Coming to science fiction, even Mary Shelley, when she first published Frankenstein in 1818, she published it anonymously, and it was only published in her name in the Paris edition in 1821. Frankenstein is often said to be the original science fiction. Science fiction has been traditionally a male-dominated area. It's been written by men for men. So that traditional science fiction of wars between aliens and machines. So that has been primarily, and even today, science fiction is considered a male domain. Although I must say that around the world and even in India, a lot of females and women are writing science fiction today. So what's science fiction and what's special about it? Like all literature, science fiction is ultimately a philosophical delving into the realities and questions that face a society in contemporary times. Science fiction also provides an author with a blank canvas to imagine. You can imagine and create any future, any world, any reality, and that can either give us hope or make us think. The only, I would say, baseline